This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joy Chan. Mysticism, a study in nature and development of spiritual consciousness by Evelyn Underhill. Part 1. The Mystic Fact. What the world, which truly knows nothing, calls mysticism is the science of ultimates, the science of self-evident reality, which cannot be reasoned about because it is the object of pure reason or perception. The babe sucking its mother's breast, and the lover returning, after 20 years' separation, to his home and food in the same bosom, are the types and princes of mystics. Coventry Patmore, the rod, the root, and the flower. The first half of Chapter 1, The Point of Departure. The most highly developed branches of the human family have in common one peculiar characteristic. They tend to produce, sporadically it is true, and often in the teeth of adverse external circumstances, a curious and definite type of personality, a type which refuses to be satisfied with that which other men call experience, and is inclined, in the words of its enemies, to deny the world in order that it may find reality. We meet these persons in the East and the West, in the ancient, medieval, and modern worlds. Their one passion appears to be the prosecution of a certain spiritual and intangible quest, the finding of a way out or a way back to some desirable state in which alone they can satisfy their craving for absolute truth. This quest for them has constituted the whole meaning of life. They have made for it without effort sacrifices which have appeared enormous to other men, and it is an indirect testimony to its objective actuality that whatever the place or period in which they have arisen, their aims, doctrines and methods have been substantially the same. Their experience, therefore, forms a body of evidence, curiously self-consistent and often mutually explanatory, which must be taken into account before we can add up the sum of the energies and potentialities of the human spirit, or reasonably speculate on its relations to the unknown world, which lies outside the boundaries of sense. All men at one time or another have fallen in love with the veiled Isis whom they call truth. With most, this has been a passing passion. They have early seen its hopelessness and turned to more practical things. But others remain all their lives the devout lovers of reality, though the manner of their love, the vision which they make to themselves of the beloved object, varies enormously. Some see truth as Dante saw Beatrice, an adorable yet intangible figure, found in this world, yet revealing the next. To others, she seems rather an evil but an irresistible enchantress, enticing, demanding payment, and betraying her lover at the last. Some have seen her in a test tube, and some in a poet's dream. Some before the altar, others in the slime. The extreme pragmatists have even sought her in the kitchen, declaring that she may best be recognized by her utility. Last stage of all, the philosophic skeptic has comforted an unsuccessful courtship by assuring himself that his mistress is not really there. Under whatsoever symbols they have objectified their quest, none of these seekers have ever been able to assure the world that they have found, seen face to face, the reality behind the veil. But if we may trust the reports of the mystics, and they are reports given with a strange accent of certainty and good faith, they have succeeded where all these others have failed, in establishing immediate communication between the spirit of man, entangled as they declare amongst material things, and that only reality, that immaterial and final being, which some philosophers call the Absolute, and most theologians call God. This, they say, and here many who are not mystics agree with them, is the hidden truth, which is the object of man's craving, the only satisfying goal of his quest. Hence, they should claim from us the same attention that we give to other explorers of countries in which we are not competent to adventure ourselves. For the mystics are the pioneers of the spiritual world, and we have no right to deny validity to their discoveries merely because we lack the opportunity or the courage necessary to those who would prosecute such explorations for themselves. It is the object of this book to attempt a description, and also, though this is needless for those who read that description in good faith, a justification of these experiences and the conclusions which have been drawn from them. So remote, however, are these matters from our ordinary habits of thought, that their investigation entails, in those who would attempt to understand them, a definite preparation, a purging of the intellect. As with those who came of old to the mysteries, purification is here the gate of knowledge. We must come to this encounter with minds cleared of prejudice and convention, must deliberately break with our inveterate habit of taking the visible world for granted. Our lazy assumption that somehow science is real and metaphysics is not. We must pull down our own card houses, descend, as the mystics say, into our nothingness, and examine for ourselves the foundations of all possible human experience, before we are in a position to criticize the buildings of the visionaries, the poets, and the saints. We must not begin to talk of the unreal world of these dreamers until we have discovered, if we can, a real world with which it may be compared. Such a criticism of reality is of course the business of philosophy. I need hardly say that this book is not written by a philosopher, nor is it addressed to students of that imperial science. Nevertheless, amateurs though we be, we cannot reach our starting point without trespassing to some extent on philosophic ground. That ground covers the whole area of first principles, and it is to first principles that we must go if we would understand the true significance of the mystic type. Let us then begin at the beginning, and remind ourselves of a few of the trite and primary facts which all practical persons agree to ignore. That beginning, for human thought, is of course the I, the ego, the self-conscious subject which is writing this book, or the other self-conscious subject which is reading it, and which declares in the teeth of all arguments, I am. Here is a point as to which we all feel quite sure. No metaphysician has yet shaken the ordinary individual's belief in his own existence. The uncertainties only begin for most of us when we ask what else is. To this I, this conscious self imprisoned in the body like an oyster in his shell, come, as we know, a constant stream of messages and experiences. Chief amongst these are the stimulation of the tactile nerves, whose result we call touch, the vibrations taken up by the optic nerve which we call light, and those taken up by the ear perceived as sound. What did these experiences mean? The first answer of the unsophisticated self is that they indicate the nature of the external world. It is to the evidence of her senses that she turns when she is asked what the world is like. From the messages received through those senses, which pour in on her whether she will or no, battering upon her gateways at every instant and from every side, she constructs that sense world which is the real and solid world of normal men. As the impressions come in, or rather those interpretations of the original impressions which her nervous system supplies, she pounces on them, much as players in the spelling game pounce on the separate letters dealt out to them. She sorts, accepts, rejects, combines, and then triumphantly produces from them a concept which is, she says, the external world. With an enviable and amazing simplicity, she attributes her own sensations to the unknown universe. The stars, she says, are bright. The grass is green. For her, as the philosopher Hume, reality consists in impressions and ideas. It is immediately apparent, however, that this sense world, this seemingly real external universe, though it may be useful and valid in other respects, cannot be the external world, but only the self's projected picture of it. It is a work of art, not a scientific fact, and, whilst it may well possess the profound significance proper to great works of art, is dangerous if treated as a subject of analysis. Very slight investigation shows that it is a picture whose relation to reality is at best symbolic and approximate, and which would have no meaning for selves whose senses or channels of communication happen to be arranged upon a different plan. The evidence of the senses, then, cannot be accepted as evidence of the nature of ultimate reality. Useful servants, they are dangerous guides. Nor can their testimony disconcert those seekers whose report they appear to contradict. The conscious self sits, so to speak, at the receiving end of a telegraph wire. On any other theory than that of mysticism, it is her one channel of communication with the hypothetical external world. The receiving instrument registers certain messages. She does not know, and, so long as she remains dependent on that instrument, never can know, the object, the reality at the other end of the wire by which those messages are sent. Neither can the messages truly disclose the nature of that object, but she is justified on the whole in accepting them as evidence that something exists beyond herself and her receiving instrument. It is obvious that the structural peculiarities of the telegraphic instrument will have exerted a modifying effect upon the message. That which is conveyed as dash and dot, colour and shape, may have been received in a very different form. Therefore this message, though it may in a partial sense be relevant to the supposed reality at the other end, can never be adequate to it. There will be fine vibrations which it fails to take up, others which it confuses together. Hence a portion of the message is always lost, or in other language, there are aspects of the world which we can never know. The sphere of our possible intellectual knowledge is thus strictly conditioned by the limits of our own personality. On this basis, not the ends of the earth, but the external termini of our own sensory nerves are the termini of our explorations, and to know oneself is really to know one's universe. We are locked up with our receiving instruments. We cannot get up and walk away in the hope of seeing whither the lines lead. Eckhart's words are still final for us. The soul can only approach created things by the voluntary reception of images. Did some mischievous demiurge choose to tickle our sensory apparatus in a new way, we should receive by this act a new universe. William James once suggested as a useful exercise for young idealists a consideration of the changes which would be worked in our ordinary world if the various branches of our receiving instruments exchanged duties. If, for instance, we heard all colours and saw all sounds. Such a remark throws a sudden light on the strange and apparently insane statement of the visionary St. Martin. I heard flowers that sounded and saw notes that shone, and on the reports of other mystics concerning a rare moment of consciousness in which the senses are fused into a single and ineffable act of perception, and colour and sound are known as aspects of one thing. Since music is but an interpretation of certain vibrations undertaken by the ear, and colour an interpretation of other vibrations performed by the eye, this is less mad than it sounds, and may yet be brought within the radius of physical science. Did such an alteration of our senses take place, the world would still send us the same messages. That strange unknown world from which, on this hypothesis, we are hermetically sealed. But we should interpret them differently. Beauty would still be ours, though speaking in another tongue. The bird's song would then strike our retina as a pageant of colour. We should see the magical tones of the wind, hear as a great fugue the repeated and harmonized greens of the forest, the cadences of stormy skies. Did we realize how slight an adjustment of our organs is needed to initiate us into such a world, we should perhaps be less contemptuous of those mystics who tell us that they apprehended the Absolute as heavenly music or uncreated light, less fanatical in our determination to make the solid world of common sense the only standard of reality. This world of common sense is a conceptual world. It may represent an external universe. It certainly does represent the activity of the human mind. Within that mind it is built up, and there most of us are content at ease for eye to dwell, like the soul in the palace of art. A direct encounter with absolute truth, then, appears to be impossible for normal, non-mystical consciousness. We cannot know the reality or even prove the existence of the simplest object, though this is a limitation which few people realize acutely and most would deny. But there persists in the race a type of personality which does realize this limitation and cannot be content with the sham realities that furnish the universe of normal life. It is necessary, as it seems, to the comfort of persons of this type to form for themselves some image of the something or nothing which is at the end of their telegraph lines, some conception of being, some theory of knowledge. They are tormented by the unknowable, ache for first principles, demand some background to the shadow show of things. Insofar as man possesses this complement, he hungers for reality, and must satisfy that hunger as best he can, staving off starvation, though he may not be filled. It is doubtful whether any two selves have offered themselves exactly the same image of the truth outside their gates. For a living metaphysic, like a living religion, is at bottom a strictly personal affair, a matter, as William James reminded us, of vision rather than of argument. Nevertheless, such a living metaphysic may, and if sound generally does, escape the stigma of subjectivism by outwardly attaching itself to a traditional school, as personal religion may and should outwardly attach itself to a traditional church. Let us then consider shortly the results arrived at by these traditional schools, the great classic theories concerning the nature of reality. In them, we see crystallized the best that the human intellect, left to itself, has been able to achieve. 1. The most obvious and generally accepted explanation of the world is of course that of naturalism, or naive realism, the point of view of the plain man. Naturalism states simply that we see the real world, though we may not see it very well. What seems to normal, healthy people to be there is approximately there. It congratulates itself on resting in the concrete. It accepts material things as real. In other words, our corrected and correlated sense impressions, raised to their highest point of efficiency, form for it the only valid material of knowledge. Knowledge itself being the classified results of exact observation. Such an attitude as this may be a counsel of prudence, in view of our ignorance of all that lies beyond. But it can never satisfy our hunger for reality. It says, in effect, the room in which we find ourselves is fairly comfortable. Draw the curtains, for the night is dark, and let us devote ourselves to describing the furniture. Unfortunately, however, even the furniture refuses to accommodate itself to the naturalistic view of things. Once we begin to examine it attentively, we find that it bounds in hints of wonder and mystery, declares aloud that even chairs and tables are not what they seem. We have seen that the most elementary criticism, applied to any ordinary object of perception, tends to invalidate the simple and comfortable creed of common sense, that not merely faith, but gross credulity is needed by the mind which would accept the apparent as the real. I say, for instance, that I see a house. I can only mean by this that the part of my receiving instrument which undertakes the duty called vision is affected in a certain way and arouses in my mind the idea house. The idea house is now treated by me as a real house, and my further observations will be an unfolding, enriching, and defining of this image. But what the external reality is which evoked the image that I call house, I do not know and never can know. It is as mysterious, as far beyond my apprehension, as the constitution of the angelic choirs. Consciousness shrinks in terror from contact with the mighty verb to be. I may of course call in one sense to corroborate, as we trustfully say, the evidence of the other. Nay, approach the house and touch it. Then the nerves of my hand will be affected by sensation which I translate as hardness and solidity. The eye by a peculiar and wholly incomprehensible sensation called redness. And from these purely personal changes, my mind constructs and externalizes an idea which it calls red bricks. Science herself, however, if she be asked to verify the reality of these perceptions, at once declares that though the material world be real, the ideas of solidity and colour are but hallucination. They belong to the human animal, not to the physical universe. Pertain to accident, not substance, as scholastic philosophy would say. The red brick, says science, is a mere convention. In reality, that bit, like all other bits of the universe, consists, so far as I know at present, of innumerable atoms whirling and dancing one about the other. It is no more solid than a snowstorm. Were you to eat of Alice in Wonderland's mushroom and shrink to the dimensions of the infraworld, each atom with its electrons might seem to you a solar system, and the red brick itself a universe. Moreover, these atoms themselves elude me as I try to grasp for them. They are only manifestations of something else. Moreover, these atoms themselves elude me as I try to grasp them. They are only manifestations of something else. Could I track matter to its lair, I might conceivably discover that it has no extension, and become an idealist in spite of myself. As for redness, as you call it, that is a question of the relation between your optic nerve and the light waves which it is unable to absorb. This evening, when the sun slows, your brick will probably be purple. A very little deviation from normal vision on your part would make it green. Even the sense that the object of perception is outside yourself may be fancy, since you as easily attribute this external quality to images seen in dreams and to waking hallucinations, as you do to those objects which, as you absurdly say, are really there. Further, there is no trustworthy standard by which we can separate the real from the unreal aspects of phenomena. Such standards as exist are conventional and correspond to convenience, not to truth. It is no argument to say that most men see the world in much the same way, and that this way is the true standard of reality. Though for practical purposes, we have agreed that sanity consists in sharing the hallucinations of our neighbours. Those who are honest with themselves know that this sharing is at best incomplete. By the voluntary adoption of the new conception of the universe, the fitting of a new alphabet to the old Morse code, a proceeding which we call the acquirement of knowledge, we can and do change to a marked extent our way of seeing things, building up new worlds from old sense impressions, and transmuting objects more easily and thoroughly than any magician. Eyes and ears, says Heraclitus, are bad witnesses to those who have barbarian souls. And even those whose souls are civilized tend to see and hear all things through a temperament. In one and the same sky the poet may discover the habitation of angels, whilst the sailor sees only the promise of dirty weather ahead. Hence, artist and surgeon, Christian and rationalist, pessimist and optimist, do actually and truly live in different and mutually exclusive worlds, not only of thought, but also of perception. Only the happy circumstance that our ordinary speech is conventional, not realistic, permits us to conceal from one another the unique and lonely world in which each lives. Now and then an artist is born, terribly articulate, foolishly truthful, who insists on speaking as he saw. Then other men, lapped warmly in their artificial universe, agree that he is mad, or at the very best, an extraordinarily imaginative fellow. Moreover, even this unique world of the individual is not permanent. Each of us, as we grow and change, works incessantly and involuntarily at the remaking of our sensual universe. We behold at any specific moment not that which is, but that which we are, and personality undergoes many readjustments in the course of its passage from birth through maturity to death. The mind which seeks the real, then, in this shifting and subjective natural world, is of necessity thrown back on itself, on images and concepts which owe more to the seer than to the seen. But reality must be real for all, once they have found it, must exist in itself upon a plane of being unconditioned by the perceiving mind. Only thus can it satisfy that mind's most vital instinct, most sacred passion, its instinct for the absolute, its passion for truth. You are not asked, as a result of these antique and elementary propositions, to wipe clean the slate of normal human experience and cast in your lot with intellectual nihilism. You are only asked to acknowledge that it is but a slate, and that the white scratches upon it which the ordinary man calls facts, and the scientific realist calls knowledge, are at best relative and conventionalized symbols of that aspect of the unknowable reality at which they hint. This being so, whilst we must all draw a picture of some kind on our slate and act in relation therewith, we cannot deny the validity, though we may deny the usefulness, of the pictures which others produce, however abnormal and impossible they may seem, since these are sketching an aspect of reality which has not come within our sensual field, and so does not and cannot form part of our world. Yet as the theologian claims that the doctrine of the Trinity veils and reveals not three but one, so the varied aspects under which the universe appears to the perceiving consciousness hint at a final reality, or in Kantian language, a transcendental object, which shall be not any one, yet all of its manifestations, transcending yet including the innumerable fragmentary worlds of individual conception. We begin then to ask what can be the nature of this one, and whence comes the persistent instinct which, receiving no encouragement from sense experience, apprehends and desires this unknown unity, this all-inclusive absolute, as the only possible satisfaction of its thirst for truth. 2. The second great conception of being, idealism, has arrived by a process of elimination at a tentative answer to this question. It whisks us far from the material universe, with its interesting array of things, its machinery, its law, into the pure, if thin, air of a metaphysical world. Whilst the naturalist world is constructed from an observation of the evidence offered by the senses, the idealist world is constructed from an observation of the processes of thought. There are but two things, he says in effect, about which we are sure: the existence of a thinking subject, a conscious self, and of an object, an idea with which that subject deals. We know, that is to say, both mind and thought. What we call the universe is really a collection of such thoughts, and these, we agree, have been more or less distorted by the subject, the individual thinker, in the process of assimilation. Obviously, we do not think all that there is to be thought, conceive all that there is to be conceived. Neither do we necessarily combine in right order and proportion those ideas which we are capable of grasping. Reality, says objective idealism, is the complete, undistorted object, the big thought, of which we pick up these fragmentary hints, the world of phenomena which we treat as real, being merely its shadow show or manifestation in space and time. According to the form of objective idealism here chosen from amongst many as typical, for almost every idealist has his own scheme of metaphysical salvation, We live in a universe which is, in popular language, the idea or dream of its creator. We, as Tweedledum explained to Alice in the most philosophic of all fairy tales, are just part of the dream. All life, all phenomena, are the endless modifications and expressions of the one transcendent object, the mighty and dynamic thought of one absolute thinker, in which we are bathed. This object, or certain aspects of it, and the place of each individual consciousness within the cosmic thought, or, as we say, our position in life, largely determines which these aspects shall be, is interpreted by the senses and conceived by the mind, under limitations which we are accustomed to call matter, space, and time. But we have no reason to suppose that matter, space, and time are necessarily parts of reality, of the ultimate idea. Probability points rather to their being the pencil and paper with which we sketch it. As our vision, our idea of things, tends to approximate more and more to that of the eternal idea, so we get nearer and nearer to reality. For the idealist's reality is simply the idea or thought of God. This, he says, is the supreme unity at which all the illusory appearances that make up the widely differing worlds of common sense, of science, of metaphysics, and of art dimly hint. This is the sense in which it can truly be said that only the supernatural possesses reality. For that world of appearance, which we call natural, is certainly largely made up of preconception and illusion, of the hints offered by the eternal real world of idea outside our gates, and the quaint concepts which we at our receiving instrument manufacture from them. There is this to be said for the argument of idealism, that in the last resort, the destinies of mankind are invariably guided not by the concrete facts of the sense world, but by concepts which are acknowledged by everyone to exist only on the mental plane. In the great moments of existence, when he rises to spiritual freedom, these are the things which every man feels to be real. It is by these and for these that he is found willing to live, work, suffer, and die. Love, patriotism, religion, altruism, fame, all belong to the transcendental world. Hence, they partake more of the nature of reality than any fact could do. And man, dimly recognizing this, has ever bowed to them as to immortal centers of energy. Religions, as a rule, are steeped in idealism. Christianity, in particular, is a trumpet call to an idealistic conception of life. Buddhism is little less. Over and over again, their scriptures tell us that only materialists will be damned. In idealism, we have perhaps the most sublime theory of being which has ever been constructed by the human intellect. A theory so sublime, in fact, that it can hardly have been produced by the exercise of pure reason alone, but must be looked upon as a manifestation of that natural mysticism, that instinct for the absolute which is latent in man. But when we ask the idealist how we are to obtain communion with the reality which he describes to us as certainly there, his system suddenly breaks down and discloses itself as a diagram of the heavens, not a ladder to the stars. This failure of idealism to find in practice the reality of which it thinks so much is due, in the opinion of the mystics, to a cause which finds epigrammatic expression in the celebrated phrase by which St. Jerome marked the distinction between religion and philosophy. Plato located the soul of man in the head. Christ located it in the heart. That is to say, idealism, though just in its premises, and often daring and honest in their application, is stultified by the exclusive intellectualism of its own methods, by its fatal trust in the squirrel work of the industrious brain instead of the piercing vision of the desirous heart. It interests man, but does not involve him in its processes, does not catch him up to the new and more real life which it describes. Hence the thing that matters, the living thing, has somehow escaped it, and its observations bear the same relation to reality as the art of the anatomist does to the mystery of birth. first half of Part 1, Chapter 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joy Chan. Mysticism, a study in nature and development of spiritual consciousness by Evelyn Underhill. Second half of Part 1, Chapter 1. 3. But there is yet another theory of being to be considered, that which may be loosely defined as philosophic skepticism. This is the attitude of those who refuse to accept either the realistic or the idealistic answer to the eternal question, and, confronted in their turn with the riddle of reality, reply that there is no riddle to solve. We of course assume for the ordinary purposes of life that for every sequence A, B, present in our consciousness, there exists a mental or material A, B in the external universe, and that the first is a strictly relevant, though probably wholly inadequate, expression of the second. The bundle of visual and auditory sensations, for instance, whose sum total I am accustomed to call Mrs. Smith, corresponds with something that exists in the actual as well as in my phenomenal world. Behind my Mrs. Smith, behind the very different Mrs. Smith which the X-rays would exhibit, there is, contends the objective idealist, a transcendental, or in the Platonic sense, an ideal Mrs. Smith, at whose qualities I cannot even guess, but whose existence is quite independent of my apprehension of it. But though we do and must act on this hypothesis, it remains only a hypothesis, and it is one which philosophic skepticism will not let pass. The external world, say the skeptical schools, is, so far as I know it, a concept present in my mind. If my mind ceased to exist, so far as I know the concept which I call the world would cease to exist too. The one thing which for me indubitably is the self's experience, its whole consciousness. Outside this circle of consciousness, I have no authority to indulge in guesses as to what may or may not be. Hence, for me, the absolute is a meaningless diagram, a superfluous complication of thought, since the mind, wholly cut off from contact with external reality, has no reason to suppose that such a reality exists except in its own ideas. Every effort made by philosophy to go forth in search of it is merely the metaphysical squirrel running round the conceptual cage. In the completion and perfect unfolding of the set of ideas with which our consciousness is furnished, lies the only reality which we can ever hope to know. Far better to stay here and make ourselves at home. Only this, for us, truly is. This purely subjective conception of being has found representatives in every school of thought, even including, by a curious paradox, that of mystical philosophy, its one effective antagonist. Thus Delacroix, after an exhaustive and even sympathetic analysis of St. Teresa's progress towards union with the Absolute, ends upon the assumption that the God with whom she was united was the content of her own subconscious mind. Such a mysticism is that of the kitten running after its own tail, a different path indeed from that which the great seekers for reality had pursued. The reductio ad absurdum of this doctrine is found in the so-called philosophy of New Thought, which begs its disciples to try quietly to realize that the infinite is really you. By its utter denial not merely of a knowable, but of a logically conceivable transcendent, it drives us in the end to the conclusion of extreme pragmatism, that truth for us is not an immutable reality, but merely that idea which happens to work out as true and useful in any given experience. There is no reality behind appearance. Therefore all faiths, all figments with which we people lack nothingness, are equally true, provided they be comfortable and good to live by. Logically carried out, this conception of being would permit each man to regard other men as non-existent except within his own consciousness, the only place where a strict skepticism will allow that anything exists. Even the mind which conceives consciousness exists for us only in our own conception of it. We no more know what we are than we know what we shall be. Man is left a conscious something in the midst, so far as he knows, of nothing, with no resources save the exploring of his own consciousness. Philosophic skepticism is particularly interesting to our present inquiry because it shows us the position in which pure reason, if left to itself, is bound to end. It is utterly logical, and though we may feel it to be absurd, we can never prove it to be so. Those who are temperamentally inclined to credulity may become naturalists and persuade themselves to believe in the reality of the sense world. Those with a certain instinct for the absolute may adopt the more reasonable faith in idealism. But the true intellectualist, who concedes nothing to instinct or emotion, is obliged in the end to adopt some form of skeptical philosophy. The horrors of nihilism, in fact, can only be escaped by the exercise of faith, by a trust in man's innate but strictly irrational instinct for that real, above all reason, beyond all thought, towards which, at its best moments, his spirit tends. If the metaphysician be true to his own postulates, he must acknowledge in the end that we are all forced to live, to think, and at last to die in an unknown and unknowable world, fed arbitrarily and diligently, yet how we know not, by ideas and suggestions whose truth we cannot test, but whose pressure we cannot resist. It is not by sight, but by faith, faith in a supposed external order which we can never prove to exist, and in the approximate truthfulness and constancy of the vague messages which we receive from it, that ordinary men must live and move. We must put our trust in laws of nature which have been devised by the human mind as a convenient epitome of its own observations of phenomena, must, for the purposes of daily life, accept these phenomena at their face value, an act of faith beside which the grosser superstitions of the Neapolitan peasant are hardly noticeable. The intellectual quest of reality, then, leads us down one of three blind alleys. 1. To an acceptance of the symbolic world of appearance as the real. 2. To the elaboration of a theory also of necessity symbolic, which, beautiful in itself, cannot help us to attain the absolute which it describes. 3. To hopeless but strictly logical skepticism. In answer to the why of the bewildered and eternal childiness, philosophy, though always ready to postulate the unknown if she can, is bound to reply only, "N'est Dieu, n'est Dieu." In spite of all her busy map-making, she cannot reach the goal which she points out to us, cannot explain the curious conditions under which we imagine that we know, cannot even divide with a sure hand the subject and object of thought. Science, whose business is with phenomena and our knowledge of them, though she too is an idealist at heart, has been accustomed to explain that all our ideas and instincts, the pictured world that we take so seriously, the oddly limited and illusory nature of our experience, appear to minister to one great end, the preservation of life, and consequent fulfillment of that highly mystical hypothesis, the cosmic idea. Each perception, she assures us, serves a useful purpose in this evolutionary scheme, a scheme, by the way, which has been invented, we know not why, by the human mind, and imposed upon an obedient universe. By vision, hearing, smell, and touch, says science, we find our way about, are warned of danger, obtain our food. The male perceives beauty in the female in order that the species may be propagated. It is true that this primitive instinct has given birth to higher and purer emotions, but these too fulfill a social purpose and are not so useless as they seem. Man must eat to live. Therefore many foods give us agreeable sensations. If he overeats, he dies. Therefore indigestion is an unpleasant pain. Certain facts of which too keen a perception would act detrimentally to the life force are, for most men, impossible of realization, i.e., the uncertainty of life, the decay of the body, the vanity of all things under the sun. When we are in good health, we all feel very real, solid, and permanent, and this is, of all our illusions, the most ridiculous, and also the most obviously useful from the point of view of the efficiency and preservation of the race. But when we look closer, we see that this brisk generalization does not cover all the ground, not even that little tract of ground of which our senses make us free. Indeed, that it is more remarkable for its omissions than for its inclusions. Reysejean has well said that from the moment in which man is no longer content to devise things useful for his existence under the exclusive action of the will to live, the principle of physical evolution has been violated. Nothing can be more certain than that man is not so content. He has been called by utilitarian philosophers a tool-making animal, the highest praise they knew how to bestow. More surely, he is a vision-making animal, a creature of perverse and unpractical ideals, dominated by dreams no less than by appetites, dreams which can only be justified upon the theory that he moves towards some other goal than that of physical perfection or intellectual supremacy, is controlled by some higher and more vital reality than that of the determinists. We are driven to the conclusion that if the theory of evolution is to include or explain the facts of artistic and spiritual experience, and it cannot be accepted by any serious thinker these great tracts of consciousness remain outside its range, it must be rebuilt on a mental rather than a physical basis. Even the most ordinary human life includes in its range of fundamental experiences violent and unforgettable sensations, forced on us, as it were, against our will, for which science finds it hard to account. These experiences and sensations, and the hours of exalted emotion which they bring with them, often recognized by us as the greatest, most significant hours of our lives, fulfill no office in relation to her pet functions of nutrition and reproduction. It is true that they are far-reaching in their effects on character, but they do little or nothing to assist that character in its struggle for physical life. To the unprejudiced eye, many of them may seem hopelessly out of place in a universe constructed on strictly physico-chemical lines, look almost as though nature, left to herself, tended to contradict her own beautifully logical laws. Their presence more, the large place which they fill in the human world of appearance, is a puzzling circumstance for deterministic philosophers, who can only escape from the dilemma here presented to them by calling these things illusions, and dignifying their own more manageable illusions with the title of facts. Amongst the more intractable of these groups of perceptions and experiences are those which we connect with religion, with pain, and with beauty. All three, for those cells which are capable of receiving their messages, possess a mysterious authority far in excess of those feelings, arguments, or appearances which they may happen to contradict. All three, were the universe of the naturalist true, would be absurd. All three have ever been treated with the reverence due to vital matters by the best minds of the race. A. I need not point out the hopelessly irrational character of all great religions, which rest, one and all, on a primary assumption that can never be intellectually demonstrated, much less proved, the assumption that the suprasensible is somehow important and real, and is intimately connected with the life of man. This fact has been incessantly dwelt upon by their critics, and has provoked many a misplaced exercise of ingenuity on the part of their intelligent friends. Yet religion, emphasizing and pushing to extremes that general dependence on faith, which we saw to be an inevitable condition of our lives, is one of the most universal and ineradicable functions of man. And this, although it constantly acts detrimentally to the interests of his merely physical existence, opposes the exclusive action of the will to live, except insofar as that will aspires to eternal life. Strictly utilitarian, almost logical in the savage, religion becomes more and more transcendental with the upward progress of the race. It begins as black magic. It ends as pure love. Why did the cosmic ideas elaborate this religious if the construction put upon its intentions are Consider again the whole group of phenomena which are known as the problem of suffering. The mental anguish and physical pain which appear to be the inevitable result of the steady operation of natural law and its voluntary existence, the cruelty, pain, and injustice of man. Here it is true, the naturalist seems at first sight to make a little difference, and can point to some amongst the cruder forms of suffering which are clearly useful to the race. Punishments for past faults, sparing to new efforts, warning against future infringements of law. But he forgets the many others which refuse to be resumed under the simple formula. Forgets to explain how it is that the cosmic idea involves the long torments of the incurable, the tortures of the innocent, the deep anguish of the bereaved, the existence of so many gratuitously agonizing forms of death. He forgets, too, the strange fact that man's capacity for suffering tends to increase in depth and subtlety with the increase of culture and civilization. Ignores the still more mysterious, perhaps most significant circumstance that the highest types have accepted it eagerly and willingly, have found in pain the grave but kindly teacher of immortal secrets, the conferrer of liberty, even the initiator into amazing joys. Those who explain suffering as the result of nature's immense fecundity, a byproduct of that overcrowding and stress through which the fittest tend to survive, forget that even were this demonstration valid and complete, it would leave the real problem untouched. The question is not, whence come those conditions which provoke in the self the experiences called sorrow, anxiety, pain, but why do these conditions hurt the self? The pain is mental. A little chloroform, and though the conditions continue unabated, the suffering is gone. Why does full consciousness always include the mysterious capacity for misery as well as for happiness? A capacity which seems at first sight to invalidate any conception of the absolute as beautiful and good. Why does evolution, as we ascend the ladder of life, foster instead of diminishing the capacity for useless mental anguish, for long, dull torment, bitter grief? Why, when so much lies outside our limited powers of perception, when so many of our own most vital functions are unperceived by consciousness, does suffering of some sort form an integral part of the experience of man? For utilitarian purposes, acute discomfort would be quite enough. The cosmic idea, as the determinists explain it, did not really need an apparatus which felt all the throes of cancer, the horrors of neurasthenia, the pangs of birth. Still less did it need the torments of impotent sympathy for other people's irremediable pain, the dreadful power of feeling the world's woe. We are hopelessly oversensitized for the part science calls us to play. Pain, however we may look at it, indicates a profound disharmony between the sense world and the human self. If it is to be vanquished, either the disharmony must be resolved by deliberate and careful adjustment of the self to the world of sense, or that self must turn from the sense world to some other with which it is in tune. Pessimist and optimist here join hands, but whilst the pessimist, resting in appearance, only sees nature red in tooth and claw, offering him little hope of escape, the optimist thinks that pain and anguish, which may in their lower forms be life's harsh guides on the path of physical evolution, in their higher and apparently useless developments are her leaders and teachers in the upper school of suprasensible reality. He believes that they press the self towards another world, still natural for him, though supernatural for his antagonist, in which it will be more at home. Watching life, he sees in pain the complement of love, and is inclined to call these the wings on which man's spirit can best take flight towards the absolute. Hence he can say with À Kempis, gloriare in tribulatione non est grave amanti, and needs not to speak of morbid folly when he sees the Christian saints run eagerly and merrily to the cross. He calls suffering the gymnastic of eternity, the terrible initiative caress of God, recognizing in it a quality for which the disagreeable rearrangement of nerve molecules cannot account. Sometimes, in the excess of his optimism, he puts to the test of practice this theory with all its implications. Refusing to be deluded by the pleasures of the sense world, he accepts instead of avoiding pain, and becomes an ascetic, a puzzling type for the convinced naturalist who, falling back upon contempt, that favoured resource of the frustrated reason, can only regard him as diseased. Pain, then, which plunges like a sword through creation, leaving on the one side cringing and degraded animals, and on the other side heroes and saints, is one of those facts of universal experience which are peculiarly intractable from the point of view of a merely materialistic philosophy. C. From this same point of view, the existence of music and poetry, the qualities of beauty and of rhythm, the evoked sensations of awe, reverence and rapture, are almost as difficult to account for. The question why an apparent corrugation of the earth's surface, called for convenience sake an Alp, coated with congealed water and perceived by us as a snowy peak, should produce in certain natures acute sensations of ecstasy and adoration. Why the skylark's song should catch us up to heaven, and wonder and mystery speak to us alike in the little speedwell's darling blue, and in the cadence of the wind, is a problem that seems to be merely absurd until it is seen to be insoluble. Here Madam How and Lady Why alike are silent. With all our busy seeking, we have not found the sorting-house where loveliness is extracted from the flux of things. We know not why great poetry should move us to unspeakable emotion, or a stream of notes, arranged in a peculiar sequence, catch us up to heightened levels of vitality. Nor can we guess how a passionate admiration for that which we call best in art or letters can possibly contribute to the physical evolution of the race. In spite of many lengthy disquisitions on aesthetics, beauty's secret is still her own. A shadowy companion, half seen, half guessed at, she keeps step with the upward march of life, and we receive the message and respond to it, not because we understand it, but because we must. Here it is that we approach that attitude of the self, that point of view which is loosely and generally called mystical. Here, instead of those broad blind alleys which philosophy showed us, a certain type of mind has always discerned three straight and narrow ways going out towards the absolute. In religion, in pain, and in beauty. And not only in these, but in many other apparently useless peculiarities of the empirical world and of the perceiving consciousness. These persons insist that they recognize at least the fringe of the real. Down these three paths, as well as by many another secret way, they claim that news comes to the self concerning levels of reality which in their wholeness are inaccessible to the senses, worlds wondrous and immortal, whose existence is not conditioned by the given world which those senses report. Beauty, said Hegel, who, though he was no mystic, had a touch of that mystical intuition which no philosopher can afford to be without, is merely the spiritual making itself known sensuously. In the good, the beautiful, the true, says Rudolf Eucken, we see reality revealing its personal character. They are parts of a coherent and substantial spiritual world. Here, some of the veils of that substantial world are stripped off. reality peeps through and is recognized, dimly or acutely, by the imprisoned self. Reysejar only develops this idea when he says, if the mind penetrates deeply into the facts of aesthetics, it will find more and more that these facts are based upon an ideal identity between the mind itself and things. At a certain point, the harmony becomes so complete and the finality so close that it gives us actual emotion. The beautiful then becomes the sublime, brief apparition by which the soul is caught up into the true mystic state and touches the absolute. It is scarcely possible to persist in this aesthetic perception without feeling lifted up by it above things and above ourselves, in an ontological vision which closely resembles the absolute of the mystics. It was of this underlying reality, this truth of things, that St. Augustine cried in a moment of lucid vision, "O beauty, so old and so new, too late have I loved thee." It is in this sense also that beauty is truth, truth beauty. And as regards the knowledge of ultimate things which is possible to ordinary men, it may well be that that is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know. Of beauty, says Plato in an immortal passage, I repeat again that we saw her there shining in company with the celestial forms, and coming to earth we find her here too, shining in clearness through the clearest aperture of sense. For sight is the most piercing of our bodily senses, though not by that is wisdom seen. Her loveliness would have been transported if there had been a visible image of her. And the other ideas, if they had visible countenance, would be equally valuable. But this is the privilege of beauty, that being the loveliest, she is also the most palpable to sight. Now he who is not merely initiated, or who has been corrupted, does not easily rise out of this world for sight of true beauty in the other. But he whose initiation is recent, and who has been the spectator of many glories in the other world, is amazed when he sees anyone having a godlike face or form, which is the expression of divine beauty. And at first a shudder runs through him, and again the old awe steals over him. Most men in the course of their lives have known such platonic hours of initiation, when the sense of beauty has risen from a pleasant feeling to a passion, and an element of strangeness and terror has been mingled with their joy. In those hours, the world has seemed charged with a new vitality, with a splendor which does not belong to it, but is poured through it, as light through a colored window, grace through a sacrament, from that perfect beauty which shines in company with the celestial forms beyond the pale of appearance. In such moods of heightened consciousness, each blade of grass seems fierce with meaning, and becomes a well of wondrous light, a little emerald set in the city of God. The seeing self is indeed an initiate thrust suddenly into the sanctuary of the mysteries, and feels the old awe and amazement with which man encounters the real. In such experiences, a new factor of the eternal calculus appears to be thrust in on us, a factor which no honest seeker for truth can afford to neglect, since, if it be dangerous to say that any two systems of knowledge are mutually exclusive, it is still more dangerous to give uncritical priority to any one system. We are bound, then, to examine this path to reality as closely and seriously as we should investigate the most neatly finished safety ladder of solid ash, which offered a Salita Alstern. Why, after all, take as our standard a material world whose existence is affirmed by nothing more trustworthy than the sense impressions of normal men, those imperfect and easily cheated channels of communication? The mystics, those adventurers of whom we spoke upon the first page of this book, have always declared, implicitly or explicitly, their distrust in these channels of communication. They have never been deceived by phenomena, nor by the careful logic of the industrious intellect. One after another, with extraordinary unanimity, they have rejected that appeal to the unreal world of appearance, which is the standard of sensible men, affirming that there is another way, another secret, by which the conscious self may reach the actuality which it seeks. More complete in their grasp of experience than the votaries of intellect or of sense, they accept as central for life those spiritual messages which are mediated by religion, by beauty, and by pain. More reasonable than the rationalists, they find in that very hunger for reality, which is the mother of all metaphysics, an implicit proof that such reality exists, that there is something else, some final satisfaction beyond the ceaseless stream of sensation which besieges consciousness. In that thou hast sought me, thou hast already found me, says the voice of absolute truth in their ears. This is the first doctrine of mysticism. Its next is that only in so far as the self is real can it hope to know reality. Like to like, quod et quod loquitur. Upon the propositions implicit in these two laws, the whole claim and practice of the mystic life depends. Finite as we are, they say, and here they speak not for themselves but for the race. Lost though we seem to be in the woods or in the wide air's wilderness, in this world of time and of chance, we have still, like the strayed animals or like the migrating birds, our homing instinct. We seek, that is a fact, we seek a city still out of sight. In the contrast with this goal we live. But if this be so, then already we possess something of being, even in our finite seeking. For the readiness to seek is already something of an attainment, even if a poor one. Further, in this seeking we are not wholly dependent on that homing instinct. For some, who have climbed to the hilltops, that city is not really out of sight. The mystics see it, and report to us concerning it. Science and metaphysics may do their best and their worst, but these pathfinders of the spirit never falter in their statements concerning that independent spiritual world which is the only goal of pilgrim man. They say that messages come to him from that spiritual world, that complete reality which we call absolute, that we are not, after all, hermetically sealed from it. To all who will receive it, news comes of a world of absolute life, absolute beauty, absolute truth, beyond the bourne of time and place. News that most of us translate and inevitably distort in the process into the language of religion, of beauty, of love, or of pain. Of all those forms of life and thought with which humanity has fed its craving for truth, mysticism alone postulates, and in the persons of its great initiates, proves not only the existence of the Absolute, but also this link, this possibility first of knowing, finally of attainment. It denies that possible knowledge is to be limited, A, to sense impressions, B, to any process of intellection, C, to the unfolding of the content of normal consciousness. Such diagrams of experience, it says, are hopelessly incomplete. The mystics find the basis of their method not in logic, but in life, in the existence of a discoverable real, a spark of true being within the seeking subject, which can, in that ineffable experience which they call the act of union, fuse itself with, and thus apprehend the reality of the sought object. In theological language, their theory of knowledge is that the spirit of man, itself essentially divine, is capable of immediate communion with God, the one reality. In mysticism, that love of truth which we saw as the beginning of all philosophy leaves the merely intellectual sphere and takes on the assured aspect of a personal passion. Where the philosopher guesses and argues, the mystic lives and looks, and speaks consequently the disconcerting language of first-hand experience, not the neat dialectic of the schools. Hence, whilst the absolute of the metaphysicians remains a diagram, impersonal and unattainable, the absolute of the mystics is lovable, attainable, alive. Oh, taste and see, they cry, in accents of astounding certainty and joy. Ours is an experimental science, We can but communicate our system, never its result. We come to you not as thinkers but as doers. Leave your deep and absurd trust in the senses with their language of dot and dash, which may possibly report fact but can never communicate personality. If philosophy has taught you anything, she has surely taught you the length of her tether, and the impossibility of attaining to the doubtless admirable grazing land which lies beyond it. One after another, idealists have arisen who, straining frantically at the rope, have announced to the world their approaching liberty, only to be flung back at last into the little circle of sensation. But here we are, a small family, it is true, yet one that refuses to die out, assuring you that we have slipped the knot and are free of those grazing grounds. This is evidence which you are bound to bring into account before you can add up the sum total of possible knowledge, for you will find it impossible to prove that the world as seen by the mystics, unimaginable, formless, dark with excess of bright, is less real than that which is expounded by the youngest and most promising demonstrator of a physical-chemical universe. We will be quite candid with you. Examine us as much as you like, our machinery, our veracity, our results. We cannot promise that you shall see what we have seen, for here each man must adventure for himself. But we defy you to stigmatize our experiences as impossible or invalid. Is your world of experience so well and logically founded that you dare make of it a standard? Philosophy tells you that it is founded on nothing better than the reports of your sensory apparatus and the traditional concepts of the race. Certainly it is imperfect. Probably it is illusion. In any event, it never touches the foundation of things. Whereas what the world, which truly knows nothing, calls mysticism, is the science of ultimates, the science of self-evident reality, which cannot be reasoned about, because it is the object of pure reason or perception. End of Part 1, Chapter 1.